my friends. Welcome back to another episode of Riding Tandem. I'm your host, Vivian Kvam, and delighted to have you here. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. And if this is your first time here, welcome. If you've been along for the journey, welcome again. As you may know or are learning for the first time, Riding Tandem is all about encouraging people like you who are entrepreneurs, who are business owners, business leaders, or maybe you've been sitting on the sidelines thinking about an idea, wanting to start a business, becoming an entrepreneur, and you're just not sure. Well, this is an opportunity for you to take a peek behind the scenes and hear the stories of real entrepreneurs and business owners and business leaders who are doing some pretty awesome and innovative things within their worlds and spaces, as well as hear the challenges that they've overcome, because I'm going to tell you right now, it's not necessarily easy to get here. And that's what this podcast is all about. Today's episode is with Dillon De Rozairo. I told him I was going to botch his name, Dillon De Rozairo. And I'm excited because he's with Nebraska Innovation Labs, which is located in Nebraska, as it sounds like. They're a not-for-profit software and app development company, which I'm like, what? How are you a not-for-profit software app? How does this work, right? So Dillon breaks that down. It's a really interesting business model. So I think you're going to enjoy that, just to like stretch your brain in a different way and think about how you can do business in different ways and in a way that has a lot of just good payoff in terms of doing good for others, which for many of us is exactly why we got into business. And so hearing how this model works, I think is really interesting for you to hear in this episode. Also, we talk about some just of the real life pieces of owning, operating, running a business. And Dillon jumps into talking about even just his age. He's a younger entrepreneur in his 20s, and he talks about some of the things, the preconceived notions that come with that, and just different ways that he has navigated the business world as a young entrepreneur as well, who has overcome some challenges and also been very successful in the space that he's in. So let's jump in. I'm going to introduce you to Nebraska Innovation Labs, and we're just going to have a really great conversation. Hey, welcome into this podcast. I'm excited to have Dillon here with me, Dillon De Rozairo, and he's with Nebraska Innovation Labs. And I'm going to start this episode by just saying from the beginning, I don't know much about what we're going to talk about today, which I think is really cool. So we're going to be talking about all kinds of fun things with software and app development. And I am a total, I'm a blank canvas when it comes to this. So I'm excited to learn. But welcome. Thanks for coming on, Dillon.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Excited to chat.
Yeah. So Dillon and I actually met at kind of like an entrepreneurial mixer, a local one here in the local area. And I really didn't get to talk with you much at all, but you had a really cool digital business card. Yep. And I think we connected the most over that because it took me a minute. I had to set up. And then you had a really cool follow-up with that. And we chatted, and then we're like, okay, we should totally do a podcast. But why don't we start there real quick? Like, people are talking about these digital business cards. Now that you've used it for a while, what do you think?
So it's an interesting thing. At first, I'm oddly enough, decently tech savvy person. I'm not by any means like a developer or anything, so I'm literally non-developer in the company, but I'm a decently techie person. I like cool, new tech personally or for business or whatever it might be. And so when I thought of the business card, or at least when I was kind of starting out and I was like, okay, I need a business card, I knew obviously there's the standard, it's not paper, but physical one that you give out to everyone and you just order hundreds of them. Yeah. And to me, it always, and I think it's pretty common that most people throw it away somewhat. They may use it, but then they end up throwing it away. So there's the whole, will they throw it away and never contact me? Or will they throw it away after they're done? And, you get into the whole environmental thing as well with that.
Right.
And what I realized is, and you also have to carry a stack. I've been to events where you hand out 30 of them, and I have physical ones as well. I rarely use them, but to carry around 30 in your pocket or something is not very easy. So kind of my outlook was, okay, let me get a digital one because it's easy. You can always have it on you, and they're pretty kind of dynamic or versatile because you can have the card that you tap to your phone, but you can have a QR code as well that still looks really good. And so I kind of went in with that. My kind of experience with it has been interesting. Sometimes people will say, hey, do you have a business card? And I'll say, yeah, you got your phone on you. And then I'll, go to tap or give them a QR code and they say, oh, never mind, which is a little interesting when you have that. And it's a lot of the times it's, I just try to kind of get around it then and just say, hey, are you on LinkedIn? And normally that kind of works. So not a huge deal there, but it's pretty well received. A lot of people do like it. I've had some people say that they're going to get one. A lot of the people kind of in my close circle use one as well. So I think they're kind of a good way to stand out a little bit, and a bit of a newer way of kind of getting information across. You can get so much more information across. Mine has not only my information, like, my phone number and email and everything like that, but it has like a, company email or website. You can do social media links. You can provide so
Mhm.
much more than you can on a, little physical card. So I thought it's pretty good so far. Rarely any negatives. It's just, I think there's a little bit, it's still somewhat in the early stages. So
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it does stand out. And I guess we're not going to talk the whole episode about business cards and networking and stuff. There's other episodes for that, but
yeah.
it does stand out, right? Like, it is a conversation piece. And to your point, whether that goes all positive or you have a sprinkling of, a little more negative, that's still a conversation piece, right? So you can have a conversation about it, which is cool. And
Yeah.
I did like the idea that you can change things. So it has that dynamic, ability to change things. A funny story. So we just ordered business cards. My business partner, Michaela, ordered them. She won't mind that I tell this story. And she ordered her business cards. She ordered mine. We, of course, looked at them, everything. Definitely when we receive them, my business card has her email on it. And we can't change it. So now we have this box of cards and we're just rolling with it. I'm literally rolling around with business cards right now with her email, and I'm using it as a conversation piece because I'm not going to throw them all away.
Yeah.
So speaking of, right, like, this is real
Yeah.
life business. This is what happens.
No, 100%. And that's like another great thing, right? As you started that, what you said is, as well as, like, the promotions happen all the time. And so being able to change your title, or you get a new like cell phone number, whatever it might be, or you decide to change your email. I've contemplated changing my email because
Yeah.
mine's currently my first name and my last name at anyinnovationlabs.com. And it's so long because
Long.
my last
Yeah.
name's long as well. And so I thought about just doing my first name at anyinnovationlabs.com. But, if I had, 100, maybe 1,000 business cards printed out with my
Mm-hmm.
name and or my email, and having to get it changed, that's just a whole piece as well. So that's also a really good kind of reason to get a digital business card as well. So
Yeah, that's fun. Okay, and here's where we put in the sponsor ad for digital business cards.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
kidding.
exactly.
We don't have one of those.
Be
Okay,
awesome.
let's talk about Nebraska Innovation Labs. It did strike me as so awesome as we talked prior to this interview, and you just mentioned it. You're the only one on your team who is not a developer.
Yep,
But what does Nebraska Innovation Labs do?
yep.
And tell us a little bit about your role, because I think it's very interesting that it's a not-for-profit
Mm.
software and app development company. And there was a lot of intriguing conversation around that I want to have with you. So what
Yeah,
is it? What is Nebraska Innovation Labs? What are you doing
yeah.
over there?
So you kind of nailed it on the head. It's a not-for-profit software and app development company, and kind of actually stating what it is it really, the goal of the company is to help, mainly startup founders or entrepreneurs, but even business owners, get access to tech that's affordable. Tech being mostly stuff that's custom built. So we're not, helping them set up, Microsoft Office or whatever it might be, but rather, hey, I want to build the next Uber, and we'll help you
Mm-hmm.
build the app from the ground up, at a very low cost. The goal of the company kind of was based on the fact that before, the cost of development was so high that a lot of people would either be discouraged, it would drag on the process of starting up a company, whatever it might be, a million and one kind of obstacles and barriers. And our goal is to kind of knock it down and get people here in the US access to local development at a low cost. So you're not, there's obviously the options previously were to use other development shops here in the US, and a lot of times that was a higher price tag, which was a barrier. Or you look at going overseas, and a lot of people don't know how to navigate that as well, in terms of, time zone differences. How are you going to collaborate with them if you can never really sit down and whiteboard with them? Worries about quality, because there is a bit of a misconception in terms of overseas quality that it actually is better than most people think,
Mm-hmm.
and for the cost you pay, it's really good. So that's always an option as well that we're very upfront about. But getting access to local development here at a pretty low cost, while being able to talk to the team, come in whenever you want. We even allow you to hire the team at the end of the development. It's a really open concept behind the Innovation Labs. And the goal really is to grow Nebraska mainly, especially to start, but really the whole ecosystem. From the talent side, will always be Nebraska based, but from a kind of building companies standpoint, I wouldn't see why we wouldn't want to bring companies from outside of Nebraska in to build stuff, just because getting them access to low cost development's great, and we're building up Nebraska's tech talent. So we're kind of hitting two birds with one stone there, in building companies by lowering the barriers, but then also giving kind of in how our model operates as we pair junior and senior tech talent to do this low cost development, is they're getting access to kind of an unparalleled learning and working opportunity and getting an unprecedented item for their portfolio. And that we have people ranging from in their teens to late 20s that are either interns or kind of entry level developers with us junior developers, getting access to doing large percents of building a platform from scratch. They're doing work that is not often seen in the intern or entry level job market. And what they get out of that is obviously, it's great for their resume and everything, but they can actually go out even when they're interviewing and everything, and it sets them so far ahead of their peers that they can kind of get a leg up in today's competitive job market, which is it's not just in tech, it's everywhere. I can, attest to that, being I come from a business background, so business major through school, is even when I was applying for internships and post-grad, full-time opportunities, it's very competitive out there. So any leg up you can get, and a lot of the times normally that's certifications and other stuff that people can easily attain or somewhat easily attain, versus this is so rare that you really will somewhat, I'm not going to say be in the top 1% for kind of experience in your field, but I would think you get very high up there by, coming and working on a project with us.
So that was one of the things I remember sticking out, was just how you are developing new talent, whether that's young talent or just somebody maybe is getting started, right? I suppose it doesn't have to be young age based, but
Yeah.
if they're looking for that learning and working opportunity, how are you finding those folks, or are they finding you? And then I think one of the questions that often comes up when people think about models like these is, how hard is it to retain them, because they are in such a figuring it out stage of their careers. How are you guys going about that with Nebraska Innovation Labs?
Yeah, so finding them has been a mix of actually them coming to us and then us reaching out and kind of working with people. We have kind of our job positions, I guess you could say, posted in a few different places. So that kind of gets people coming to us, but also somewhat outreach as well, a bit of a mix. And then we work with a lot of academic institutions here. Kind of one of the, I guess, not secondary objectives, but kind of beliefs in the company on top of building companies and building talent, is to help underserved communities, and kind of helping people who have less of a kind of chance. So while working with obviously universities and all of that, we're also working with academic institutions of all kinds. We're even working with organizations like Avenue Scholars here in Omaha, that help, students that are transitioning from high school to college, and coming from various backgrounds, and giving students a chance who have no development experience, but giving them an opportunity to get some, and really get some valuable experience as well. In terms of retaining them, so this is actually kind of a tricky question, in that we don't necessarily want to retain them because of the opportunity we're giving. So it's not that we're trying to just let them go after every project, but what we rather do is we take them on, try to put them through a project to build up some skills for them. And then what we try to do is create what I call exit funnels for them. So there's a few different exit funnels. The first and kind of the most ideal one is we encourage the founders to bring them on, or whoever we built some software or an app for. And we basically, the reasoning behind it is, who's going to know what was built better than the team that built it? And that saves you the time and cost associated with bringing others up to speed. And it continues your somewhat development, whether it's just basic maintenance or, working on your roadmap, or whether your roadmap's quickly accelerated into kind of building a version 2. You're getting still using the same model, and whether it's with continued work with us as such, and we maintain your team, just because a lot of times, day one of having an MVP, you're not going to have an office or even maybe people to manage your team and do stuff like payroll. We can do that at still a low cost and kind of build that. But ideally, the goal is for at some point for you to take on the team, have your own office space, and have your own internal development team, so that you can, succeed and you're not dependent on another organization. So that's kind of the number one route that, once again, helps the founder getting continued access to low cost development, but then also helps those, kind of junior developers is the best term for them, get access to now a full-time career. Because what we do is, it's not contracted at all, but it's more like project based. So it's not going to be employment for a certain, for a somewhat indefinite employment. It's employment for the time that the project will take, which can range, a few months to, like 4, 6, maybe 9 months in total, depending on the project size. So that's kind of the number one exit funnel. The second exit funnel we have is depending on kind of the person's, not only their goals, but the kind of person they are, as well as if they're kind of a natural born leader or they have leadership potential. What we'll do is we'll work with them, put them on a few projects, and kind of build them up into a senior person to eventually have people under them. And what that might be is, their first project, they're just at a junior level, working with a few other junior people and a senior person or a few senior people, and building something out. And then the next project, they're somewhat in between the junior team and the senior team. So like, hey, I understand how the processes work. Feel free to come to me. And they're just a bit more of an in between before they go to a senior person asking questions. And I think they not only will know the processes better, but they'll kind of been in the shoes of, hey, I helped a startup build something. And, as a lot of people know, the startup scene is not, it's not the easiest and it's not the most straightforward. It's not streamlined. So
Right.
we're navigating that process. And the final process that we kind of do is we try to work with companies here of all sizes, whether it's another startup all the way through to a big player, the biggest players in the state, and try to let their kind of HR teams know, hey, here's what we're building in terms of talent, and we'd love to work with you to kind of warm intro you to them. So that's not only giving you references and kind of working with you and the junior developer on, here's how we're going to transition you over to them, making sure if you're looking for a certain kind of experience that we can factor that in if it's applicable to our projects, and kind of really helping them get access to good talent, because there's a huge demand for experienced tech talent and not a huge supply. And then on the other end of that, which we're kind of picking out of to build up, is there's a huge supply of inexperienced tech talent and not a huge demand just because of how much supply there is. And there's not really much bridging the gap. So now we're there kind of to bridge the gap. So
it's very cool. It's such an interesting model, I think, to go after. I'm curious with this too. So again, I'm going to ask some questions, and you know that I'm like not familiar with this space, right? Which I think is fun because I think a lot of people aren't. So I'm going to like just say, raise my hand, ask questions.
Yep.
I know that sometimes within startup world, when they are building out, when their startup revolves around a piece of tech. So if they want to build an app or a software, and that's really what the product is, oftentimes a developer will come on as a partner where they're going to, get a certain amount of evaluation out of that. How does that play in with the model that you're using? Is that an option, or how do you see startups navigate that? And as I'm asking that, maybe that's not standard. Maybe those are just the stories I've heard. So I'm kind of curious how that works.
No, that's definitely sometimes the case as well. I think it just depends on the founder and kind of their goals, and maybe even somewhat their personality. If they're a bit more of the lone wolf type and they just need help in the tech space, but they don't want a full-on partner, they might not, but it's not uncommon. We somewhat encourage that as well. Our somewhat senior people are also up for grabs. A lot of the times these senior people are, coming from either another job, or they're somewhat maybe doing it as a retirement thing, whatever it might be, in a ton of different situations. And our senior developers only work part-time. That's how we also keep the cost low, is they're there to somewhat be a teacher, and the junior developers are the students. So I always relate it to the teacher will never do your homework for you, but they'll help you get it done. And so because of that, they're there part-time, and at the end of it, they're also somewhat very knowledgeable to where they could come onto your team as well. And they could be brought on for maybe an equity piece, since they know it back to front and they can speak on it at the highest level, versus the junior team obviously built it, but they were building it under somewhat instruction. So that's definitely an option as well for the startups. We kind of have that on the table as well. That's what I really do think is a pro of kind of working with us, or at least a pro of the Innovation Labs model, is that all of our talent's up for grabs and all of our teams are dedicated as well. Because we are cycling through so much talent, we don't have to hold on to any, and therefore we don't have a set team that is, working on 5 or 6 or however many projects at the same time. We bring on talent and then release talent and send them out into, our exit funnels as need be. So you have a dedicated team working on your project. So they're not, ever slammed up against 2 deadlines, or, under too much pressure where they might underperform on one thing. They're fully dedicated to your project. And because of that, they're most knowledgeable in it. They're not, worried about anything else. And then they're up for grabs at the end on both the senior and junior levels. So
it's pretty cool. I like it. What led you to this, Dillon? Like, how did you get involved in this space?
Yeah, so a bit of a semi background on that, as well as I, outside of this, have my own company as well. So I've been through the startup scene, or I guess part of it, and I am not technical myself. So there's also a reason I'm the only non-developer is I tried development in the past. It's something that definitely didn't align 100% with me. I may try it in the near future just so I can really be a real expert in this area, back to front versus just kind of at a high level. But because of that, I went through the whole startup process of taking an idea, and obviously it's idea to exit, everyone says, but taking an idea as far as you can, and being non-technical as I've been in these founders' shoes. So when I go talk to people and they're like, "Hey, I want to build an app, but I just have no idea how, and I don't know how I'm going to pay for it, and I don't know who to do it," and when I go to these people, I have no idea what they're talking about. Is I've been in their shoes to where they can, I can relate to them and they can relate to me, and they don't feel like they're probably being sold on something that's not something that they feel like they're getting sold on that they don't need. Rather, there it's like, oh, you've been in my shoes, like you're helping me, not selling me on something. So that's kind of at least how I think I fit into this position. How I came into it was an initiative started by my dad, who's a serial entrepreneur here in Omaha. He runs a few different companies, and kind of his workload between those kind of skyrocketed recently. And kind of I first came on part time to help him scale. That was just taking meetings wherever I could and attending events. But then eventually came on full time as it needed kind of some more fuel in the fire, I say. So that's kind of how I got into it. But coming from a background of being a non-technical founder, I think I decently fit into the position of talking to these founders as well. So
yeah, that's cool. I love it. When you think about that, because I do think for a lot of folks who they have an idea, right? But it revolves around tech of some kind, whether it's a software or an app. And there can be that I have no idea how to do that. And I think a lot of business ideas stop there. What do you offer as advice to people who are possibly listening and thinking, yeah, I have always had this idea, but that is so outside of my ability to be able to see it come to life? When you reflect on your story, what might you offer them if you were to talk with them directly?
Well, I would say kind of the number one thing is we're here to be your kind of tech partner, but outside of obviously the innovation labs, I would say every company, I somewhat think, and this isn't like based off of anything rather than my just own personal kind of opinion and experiences. Every business needs three, I guess, pieces to it, and that's a somewhat subject matter expert, a business expert that can manage the company, and then a tech expert if it's a tech company. So it's somewhat subjective a lot of the times, and the kind of the person you're talking about is the business expert here. So whether it's a nurse or a doctor that wants to build something in the medical space, or an athlete that wants to build something in the sports tech space, whatever it might be, they know their industry or kind of area back to front likely, or at least the area that they want to build something in, but they don't know anything about selling, marketing, even stuff like payroll, all of that. They don't know how to manage employees, whatever it might be. And then they also don't know tech, and that's very common. What I always think is you can somewhat learn the business piece, so you can be the subject matter expert and learn the business piece, and then we're here to be your tech partner. But what I tell people is a lot of the times I've rarely seen someone that can do all three. It does exist, but it's very rare. So because of that, kind of that feeling you're feeling of, is this outside of my scope? I think a lot of people will feel that, but realizing that almost no one does it really by themselves, because rarely does someone wear all three hats. I've seen, a lot of the times I believe you'll wear obviously at least one hat, but ideally you can wear two, and a lot of times that's the subject matter and business expert. And if you can wear both of those, or you can start as a subject matter expert, and while we're doing development on whatever we're building for, you become the business expert and just learn how am I going to go to market, and just get a base idea on how to do that. And kind of we'll work with you on the other pieces as well at a high level. So that's kind of my advice is, rarely do people do it by themselves, but those are the pieces that exist in it, and kind of breaking it down on here's how you can go about doing it. And we even have access through honestly just networks of, here's a person who has a business background and they have an interest in like music, and you're trying to do a music platform or something. They'd be a great person with a business background and an interest in music to be your business piece of it. So stuff like that, where we can fit in pieces of, here's your business co-founder, you're the subject matter expert, we can build the tech, and, we can hit the ground running, stuff like that.
That's really cool. Are you able to share just some like examples of like when people say tech, software, apps, like, what are we talking about? Like what types of ideas do people come to you with?
Yeah.
And then my follow-up to that is, how developed are the ideas when they come to you?
Yeah. So in terms of what kind of ideas we get, it varies, and it has not been. And honestly, people always ask like, "What's the best type?" And there's obviously some that we see that are better in terms of like feasibility, but there's none that really like sit much better with us in terms from a development standpoint. So we get ideas in every industry. We sometimes get hardware ideas as well. We only do software, but we'll work with hardware companies to build the software piece of it and pair it with the hardware. But because of that, we see ideas kind of in every area and kind of broadly out there. I've even had people come to me and say like, "Hey, do you at least know anyone?" So just trying to kind of piggyback off of our network of, I'm trying to build a product, like a physical product that has no tech piece to it, and I just need someone to help me build a prototype, and then obviously go do mass manufacturing. And it turned out I had someone within my network that I think could help them. So
Cool.
stuff like that obviously comes to us, but mainly it is mostly software and then occasionally some hardware pieces, and it really is kind of industry agnostic, where it's can come from anywhere. B2B seems to be a bit more common. We get less B2C type stuff, but in terms of kind of from I guess I don't know if platform would be the right word, but from that standpoint, we get like physical apps that'll be on your phone or softwares that'll run on your computer. It kind of ranges what we'll get there. And then in terms of where they're at in the process, that's what varies. So obviously the most ideal client for us is someone who's ready for development, but we also realize we can't just work with people who are ready for development because, that's kind of just cherry picking at that point, and it's going to be obviously a lot harder. What we found is we can meet with people at any stage in the process. So I meet with people all the time that are just at the idea stage, and I tell them, my advice is the first thing you should do is kind of market validation or customer discovery, because before you go out and spend money or even spend time, getting a name, logo, domain, even legally registering it with the state and the government and everything, is you should make sure that your idea is actually needed. It's a solution that people are going to want, and it's not creating another problem. And I say, go out, ask your customers what they're currently using to solve the problem, what they like, what they dislike, what they wish it had. And then even somewhat slightly pitch what you're trying to build and just say, hey, if there was a solution that offered this, this, and this, would you use it? You don't need to throw out pricing, nothing like that. You're just trying to get a base feel of, would someone use this? From there, if you can determine it's feasible, then you can start moving down the process of, then get a name, get a logo, get a domain, legally register it and everything. And then you can start going after more and more. Especially, you do want to get a name somewhat early on so that people start tying it to you, just so that when you have conversations and you're like, hey, I just started a company today that's going to, revolutionize the ride sharing space. And you say, the name for it, then a few months down the road, when you're maybe just one step further, you can say the name and they might remember it. And you start gathering some kind of familiarity with it in the space. So we kind of work through that, obviously legally registering it, looking at funding. We work with kind of investors in a few different spaces to help fund it. We have partners in that market validation space as well. So helping people there, sometimes they either don't want to or can't do it. Helping people with that marketing piece of how to, I don't have time, or I don't want to create my own logo, and I don't want to come up with a name. I'm not creative, or, I don't want to go look for domains, all that. We have partners there as well, can help with also the registration. But we encourage you to do as much as you can as well. We'll give you, free tools to find a name, and that cross-references a domain, and using AI to create a logo. But kind of through partners and through our own experience, we can kind of help get you to development, but everything before then is on the table, and we're more than willing to help you get access to whatever you need. So
that's cool. Does when you go into processes like these, do you ever recommend that an idea is sort of like mocked up first before going into full-on development as part of the validation process? I'm kind of thinking about that validation process that you mentioned, which is so important. I mean,
yeah.
How often, and not even in software tech space, right? Like people are like, oh, everyone's going to love my thing, whatever it is. And then you get asking questions. You're like, maybe they will, but you need to take it 3 steps this direction or that direction before you buy a building or get a logo, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to things like this, do you ever recommend that they have mocked something up, even if it's not workable? I'm thinking, like using like a Figma model or something like that.
100%. I think that's also somewhat necessary, especially when you get into the funding piece, but also that might help with market validation, is to have something that you can show to people. A lot of times I would think the market validation you might be doing is in person, kind of very casually, or over the phone. So you might not be able to show people. If you're in a space where you can show people, I would 100% try to get mockups in something like Figma, or even create a like I don't know how to even put this, a functional but not functional wireframe. I've seen people do it in like Wix, where it has buttons, but when you click the button it doesn't actually do anything, or when you click it it's really going to a different web page rather than actually like executing on kind of action items. Doing that 100% helps. And I think once you get to that funding piece, I wouldn't say it's maybe 100% necessary, but I think it's really, really recommended when you go in, especially when you're going to pitch for investment, to have some sort of base wireframe. And even when you're going to apply for grants and stuff like that, it'd be really good to have it. And if you can get, I've seen somewhat functional ones where it's not, people can't use it as such, but you can click it and it actually works. It just doesn't have all, when you click the send email button, it'll prompt saying an email was sent, but an email wasn't actually sent, stuff like that. I think that could be really useful. And the kind of more in depth you get the wireframe without obviously spending too much money and time on it, it really kind of gets your point across of, if I go on a website and I can kind of play with the software before I even buy it, that's huge. I've seen that before. And I think that's like one of the greatest things ever, when you can just play around and you're not really actually doing anything, but you can click the buttons and just mess around with it and get a feel for it. 100%. So if you can do that when you're anywhere between market validation and actually starting development, I'd 100% encourage it.
Yeah, that's cool. That makes a lot of sense. And I think you can learn a lot through those processes, right? Do you ever find that people come to you and they go, we think this should be an app, let's say, and you get in process or discussion, you're like, no, it shouldn't. This could be solved with this or in a different way. Have you ever run into those stories?
Yeah, so oddly enough, and we do this on a lot of different angles as well, but I think a lot of people do think an app is needed. And the number one thing that we say, and this is personal, like almost opinion, is like, we have too many apps on our phones. Like I think everyone does. And so the number one thing, the way I look at it and the way I even treat it in my personal life, or whatever reason I'd be downloading an app, the way I look at it is, am I going to use this enough to justify an app? So obviously, stuff like Uber or whatever it might be, you use it and you're going to need an app. But something like a, unit converter that just converts like kilograms to pounds or something, you probably don't, I don't know, maybe you do use it a lot, but most of the time you could just Google it and go to a website to convert stuff like that. So you're not probably going to download an app. So it really depends on how much someone's going to use it. In the B2B space, more often than not, especially when it's like field related stuff, an app is somewhat needed, so people in the field aren't trying to navigate to a website. But if it's something that's really just not being done like almost in real time, an app might not be needed. So we tell people that all the time, because not only, I guess the number one reason is it'll save them money. There is an added cost with taking something and making it a native app. So we 100% tell people that. We also, from a different standpoint, sometimes discourage people from even building something, or at least maybe starting with building something from scratch. Is we'll get people all the time that, I want to build an app for XYZ. And we tell them, that's great, and that's definitely an option, but try doing this low code, no code solution and just see whether it's just to get market validation, or maybe it could be a permanent solution. We've had organizations that come to us that want it for some internal use, so they're not going to monetize it. And it's looking at, okay, is the development cost going to be justified by, I guess, the benefit from it, versus paying maybe for a monthly subscription to license some software that already exists. And maybe it's a software that's kind of like white labeled, so you can put your own logo on it and just kind of use it. So we encourage that as well. And that ties back to the not-for-profit piece, and that we can be honest. Our goal is to really build companies and do what's best for them, not just make money, because our goal isn't to make money. So 100%, we're very upfront on, whether you use another solution permanently, temporarily, and being very honest if you are going to get something built from scratch on what do you actually need, because we will try to build stuff in a way that maybe your version 1 is just web-based, but version 2 then has a native app. And that's purely from a budgeting standpoint, a timeline standpoint, really what's going to be best for your business, and like, what do you need to go to market? Because the whole goal behind the company originally was just building out MVPs. And that's the number one thing, and you're probably pretty familiar with, is when someone wants to build something, I think they want to build it with all the bells and whistles. And, then you start looking at, okay, how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost? And most people don't know where to dial back. And we will use our best judgment, along with your best judgment being hopefully the subject matter expert on what you're trying to build, on what's the minimum thing you can take to market, and then from there build off of it. Because the last thing you want to do is spend maybe a year and $500,000 or something building an app and half the stuff or 75% of the stuff you thought was needed isn't needed, and then you can't get a refund on development, sadly. Like it's not like that, so that's the last thing you want. So
Yeah. Like, hey, can you take this heart button away? I don't need it anymore.
exactly,
Like,
yeah,
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 we could take it away, but you paid for the heart.
exactly, yeah. So you can somewhat get it returned, but it's a return with no refund, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
So.
And I think about, I do think that is a big misconception. I'm so glad you're talking about that. We, as business owners in any sector, think we need to go out the gate with the most polished, beautiful, finished product, right? And I think within the software apps in the tech industry, that can come with a very hefty price tag.
Yep.
And I think it can even with physical products too. If you're selling, you're designing tennis shoes and whatnot, it can be very expensive, to fabricate things or to manufacture things for prototyping. But I do think in that software space, it can feel so easy to be like, oh, we'll just add this and we'll just add this and we'll just add this. And it's like our brains don't compute how much we're adding on here, like how quickly that can add up. And I think about some of the most used softwares, applications, just things that people interact with. One I think about is we as a team use Asana here for our project management. And we adopted it when it first came out. We were on like beta free versions. And I think about that and I'm like, it really solved a problem that we had at the time. And since then we have grown with that. And I think a little bit too, if I was to enter into it right now, there's almost so much that I don't know if I would love it as much as I love it because I grew with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so another story I think of with that is Facebook. If you think back to when Facebook first came out, it was kind of clunky. I mean, compared to where it's at now, we take for granted all of the functionality that we have, but it came out the gate with essentially very little functionality when you really think about it. And we've grown with it, and they have looked for, what do people want? What do they interact with? Okay, we're going to add this. And so I just think about those things when it's so easy to look at the end shiny products that we see now. But if we think back and reflect to, you remember when that first started? Like, and they did well, right? Like they've done very well.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean, Netflix is like a great example of
Oh, yeah.
physical DVDs, and now it's a library that you can access on any device with
Yes.
I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of movies and TV shows, and it's like the end goal, and that was given tech at the time, but the ideal thing would be to get access to as much as possible, and whether that was having some sort of red box. The most ideal thing or end solution for them at the time might have been to have a red box outside every house, and just you have access to any movie or 1,000 movies outside of your house. And if that existed today, no one would use it because I don't own a DVD player, and I don't know how many people do. So if you think too far in the future, you can even run into stuff like that. But 100% of a lot of the times, especially when you're doing something that's really solving a problem that doesn't either get solved by another solution or solves it in a different way, you can go to market with something that's not bare bones, but you can go with something pretty dialed back and then build off of it rather than just building it all up front.
Yeah, it makes me think of staying really true to what is the problem you're trying to solve, and does your product solve the problem? Then go. And you can add on additional features, right?
Yeah.
This is a terrible word picture, but I'm thinking like, hey, if you want a hamburger and you get a hamburger patty on a bun with cheese, like you have a hamburger, like you have it. Now we can start adding on, all the other things. And yes, is it going to be like the most delectable gourmet burger ever? Yeah. Absolutely. But the plain hamburger also solved the problem, right? Yeah. I was hungry and I wanted a hamburger.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. These hamburger analogies. I must be thinking about hamburgers right now.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions? Have we covered them? Are there others that you run into where you're like, yeah, people don't know and I'd want them to know this?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of misconceptions with starting something. I think age, background, cost somewhat, and we're somewhat solving that problem. Somewhat tying into background is network. really, I think there's a lot of misconceptions. The number one thing that I hit on is age, and I'll just start there and kind of go down the list of I'm only 23, and so entering this space of talking to people that are, trying to start something, and they think I'm just a kid, and they probably, when I go to events and stuff, probably think I'm like looking for a job or whatever it might be. Is originally when I first thought about entering the space of like even starting my own thing or whatever it might be, I wondered going into these events, would anyone take me seriously? Because are they going to think I'm just a student? Because at the end of the day, there are students that go to networking events looking for a job, and that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with that. That's honestly a really good idea, because you'll run into a lot of startups, and I personally think startups are better than big companies, at least in my opinion. But I went to these events and I was like, is anyone going to take me seriously? Because I somewhat don't know anything about business. Like, I'm either starting a business, or you're going to be in one of two places. You're either very early in starting a business, or you haven't started one and you're just trying to start something. And that's completely okay. You can go into these events, and I've heard it before. And I mean, I haven't heard anyone say anything negative, and I don't think anything negative about it. Is go in and literally just say, I want to start something at some point. And
Mm-hmm.
you can just sit there and somewhat listen and just learn a lot by just hearing these conversations of people who are starting something, or who have started something and are on their next venture, whatever it might be, and learn from it. I still, and I say this to this day because I have no kind of shame in it, is I go to these events and sometimes I hear terms or whatever thrown around that I don't know. And it's, a finance term or a legal term or whatever it might be. And I won't know. And if it's not, especially like a one-on-one conversation where someone's asking me for advice or an opinion on something, I will just wait, and as soon as I get a free moment, I'll type it in my notes. And then as soon as I get in the car, or I get back home, or get to a laptop or whatever, I'll look it up and try to become an expert on it, so that next time it's brought up, I can speak on it. And if you can also go ahead and ask, it depends on the situation, but 100% when you start out, you'll do a lot more listening than talking when you go to these events. But there's nothing wrong with that, because no one's going to sit there and wonder why you're not talking, especially when you're at a younger age. Like, they know you're here to learn. So I think age is the number one misconception. I think, honestly, if you're past the age of 16, you should probably be able to start something, and that's just so you can drive. Even then, you can, I mean, I've seen it, you can start stuff earlier than that. I think that's a somewhat reasonable standpoint to start something. But if you're younger and you have an idea, I'd say go for it. So I think age is the number one thing. I think background is another huge kind of thing people think is bigger than it is you don't need to come from an entrepreneurial background to start something. I don't think, even some of the biggest companies in the world were started by people whose parents were entrepreneurs, or started something of their own. And that's because at the end of the day, all it is you seeing potential in something and wanting to pursue a solution, or pursuing that potential. So I don't think you have to come from an entrepreneurial background, especially with how today works and the access to information you get through the internet at a base level, but using, AI and going out and networking and be able to ask subject matter experts questions on stuff with access to so much information, either ease of access through events or at the tip of your fingers through technology. I don't think you have to come from a background, because you don't need to go and ask your parents or family questions when you can go get them answered by other people or the internet. So I think that's also a huge thing as well. Somewhat tying into background is money. Most, if not, I would say most businesses aren't started because someone was like, hey, I have an extra X amount of dollars that I want to put into a thing. Like, a lot of the times people are starting with either nothing, or they're starting with a little bit, but it's not going to fund the whole thing. And through grants and investment, and maybe, for a year, you have to put aside some money and bootstrap it yourself, whatever it might be. Through all those different avenues, people start stuff all the time. So you don't need to come from money or an entrepreneurial background. I think are kind of two of the biggest ones I see in this space. So I think there are a lot of misconceptions, though. And I think the biggest misconception, which is maybe there, is that it's easy to start one. I think people fall into one of two things, and it's more in the middle. And people think it's too hard to start something, and it really isn't, because it's like, through networking, you can get a lot, and through learning, you can get a lot out of it. And so it's easier than most people somewhat think there. But then I also think people think that there's, government money to fund the whole thing, and partners that can do everything at a low cost and whatever it might be. And if they think it's easier than it is, I think those are two somewhat misconceptions that really it falls in the middle of. It's not hard, but it's also not easy. Like, it will require you to put in some effort, but there's also access to a lot of resources that make it easier. So
yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot. I actually had a friend who challenged me recently, and he said, Vivian, I think you should start teaching people your way of being an entrepreneur. And I was like, I'm not sure if I have a way, you know? He's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you do. You need to think about it and come up with what the process is. I'd be really curious to know what the process is. And I'm like, okay, what is the process, you know? And so in thinking or reflecting on that and what you're saying, it's just prompting this more. So thank you. Of you're exactly right in that it isn't easy and it isn't hard. It is, I think, consistency is what keeps coming to my mind, and you're spurring for me right now. And for some people, consistency is very easy, and for others, it's really hard. And I think this is where we get these ideas of like, oh, it's so easy, it's effortless, everything just fell into their lap. And we also get this misconception of it's so hard, like nothing's coming my way. And I think it has a lot to do with very small, consistent behaviors.
Yep.
Um, so I'm still fleshing this out and thinking it through. But as you're talking, when I think about people who are successful in starting a business and maintaining a business, they put in consistent effort. That doesn't mean they were like eating gruel and at the grindstone. There was a huge hype around this. I feel like it's starting to go away now, where it was like you're not an entrepreneur unless you are suffering, right?
Yeah.
Like literally sweating blood and sitting on backless chairs and eating ramen. Like if that's not you and there are 8 of you crammed into one dorm room starting a thing, like you're not really an entrepreneur. And that
Yeah.
was a real thing. Like I remember that in my 20s and I was like, well, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. That looks terrible. And then I think it falls on the other end of like the internet's made everything easy. Like you can sit back and I was just talking on another podcast interview, actually right before this one. People have this idea that you could just send an email and make $1 million, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you can if you've been really consistent about nurturing and building that. So, yeah, I just think that's important. I'm so glad that you talked about that. It is about hard work, but I think it's more about consistent work. And that's the hard part, right? I mean,
100%.
it's not very sexy, really, when you think about it. It's like, yeah, it is actually showing up and consistently answering the emails,
Yeah.
consistently paying the bills, consistently looking at your numbers, consistently being the person that you are in your leadership style with your people. Like, that's hard. That's hard. It's hard freaking work.
Yeah. No, 100%. I 100% agree. And that's the thing is, I think what might scare some people off, but what really is the reality of it is you could spend, every day for, a year, if not years, going after something like a startup or whatever, a company pursuing an idea, and it could fail. And then you could do it again and it could fail. And it is going to be days and just a long period of time of consistently doing stuff with no result. And then the end result could be that it fails and you just have to go and pursue something else or slightly pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And that is somewhat the reality of like you'll run into roadblocks and you'll run into stuff that you just don't know how to get past this. And it's what I just say is like somewhat block and tackle, or you just solve one problem after another. And at some point, especially if you're just consistent, I find it hard to believe that you can fail. So, you've heard stories probably of founders who failed their first 9 startups and their 10th one succeeded, and it took them a decade, and it was a year every startup, and every day they were working on that. And that's sometimes the case. You obviously hope your first one goes well, and you hope it's a cakewalk, and sometimes it is somewhat. Like I think some people have an easier way, and it just depends on what you're doing and luck, but whatever it might be. But I think that consistent dedication and hard work to doing something every day and realizing you're not going to get the result within few days, few weeks, few months, few years, even if you're okay and can push through that, I think you'll be successful. So 100%, I think that's kind of the name of the game, is just constantly attacking something, and at some point you'll succeed.
Yeah, and this is such an interesting, gosh, I feel like we could just have a whole conversation on this. A lot of people will approach me and ask, should I quit my day job, right? Or is there security? There's not gonna be any security. It's just gonna be, I have so much security in my job, or, what's the payoff, et cetera. And there's so many times I look at it and go, we're really doing the same thing. You can stay if that is something you like typical 9 to 5 job, and there is nothing wrong with that. But do realize that to get to the big payoff, it's you showing up consistently and putting in the hard work every day. If you think that over here on this side in entrepreneur world that there's some fast track, there isn't, right? Like you're still going to show up every day and put in the consistent work. And in your 9 to 5, you could put in your consistent work for 14 years and get laid off. You know, you can put in the consistent work in the entrepreneur world for 14 years and the idea not pan out. So like at the end of the day, sometimes I'm like, we're really just, it's not that different. You're just picking the path that you want to follow and like you have a passion for. And so there's no right or wrong. Like there's no, well, life is better if you're an entrepreneur or not. I like my life as an entrepreneur. And I like to encourage people who are thinking they might think they'd like this life. Like, yeah, come on over and give it a try, you know?
Yeah.
But end of the day, like as humans, we just have to put the consistent work in to see the results that we want. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. And we have to start over again.
No, 100%. I think that's 100% true. And I 100% agree in that, yeah, like what you said, when you said laid off, I was also thinking like you could work at a company for X years and be trying, as hard as you can. And then you get overlooked for a promotion that you've been chasing for so long. And It's the same thing. You could chase after or build an idea. And I mean, it happens all the time. Like the idea gets stolen by a bigger company or something. And you hope, obviously, this stuff never happens, but 1,000,001 things can cause a startup to fail. And 1,000,001 things can cause your path through maybe a big company to fail as well. They're both equally, somewhat risky.
Devastating.
And you just got to, exactly. You just got to choose which one you're somewhat more comfortable with. And it's, once again, very much aligning with kind of the person you are and the life you want to live, I think, as well, because you're probably very familiar with this, is there's obviously some days when you're somewhat your own boss, you can say, where you don't have to work. But then there's also some days where you're working nonstop and you don't have any breaks. And I think it's also factoring in, you have to be the kind of person that maybe you don't work a day because you want to take the day off or whatever, but then realizing somewhat the loss that's associated with that and factoring in like, okay, you have to determine your almost work-life balance, if that's a thing, though I almost somewhat don't think that's a thing with entrepreneurship. But that's the work and life balance is just almost like a different proportions when you're talking about entrepreneurship. So 100%, I agree. I think I don't think there's anything wrong, once again, with doing kind of the 9 to 5 and working towards something on that level, because that's for some people as well. Sometimes the stress and the risk and all of what's associated with starting something can drive people crazy. People who are pursuing it and people who gave up, or people who don't want to pursue it, all of the above. And so I really do think it's kind of the person you are and seeing if you want it, what path you want to go down. Because I think the same kind of, almost those same things of stress and maybe anxiety, whatever it might be, all those things that you can go through with entrepreneurship, or that might be thought as entrepreneurship, I think I would probably experience those in a big company, because I'm like, if I'm one of a team of 100 doing something, I'd get like, it'd drive me crazy. I'm like, I'm never going to be able to make a name for myself, and I'm never going to be able to really have control over what I'm doing, stuff like that. So,
yeah, different flavors for sure.
Yeah.
Are there any, when you think about just managing your life and business, and that stress levels do come up, are there like favorite tools you like to use or practices in your life you like to use? What would that be?
Yeah. So I'm a very organized person by nature. With that being said, I'm also someone who somewhat thinks like I try to do as much as I can on my own. So when I started and kind of as I've added stuff on, my notes used to be in my head. And then once I added like 2 or 3 technical verticals to my life, I was like, hey, this is getting too much. Like there's 100 items across 3 lists, and my brain has them like all scattered and it dropped a few. And so I used to just do it, as bad as it sounds, in my like iPhone notes. I used to just write it line by line, but not have it categorized. And I was like, it started to get to a point where I was like, hey, some of these verticals need more attention at certain times than I do. So like whether it's one company over my personal life, or both companies over personal, or, a hobby, or whatever it might be, or just basic to-dos. And so I now moved to, as I run everything out of Trello. So I use Trello, and that's for personal and work. And I use it more rather than project management as just like a to-do list. So that's the number one thing I have. outside of that, I oddly enough just have so much going on that I don't have too much structure, but I'm not a person who needs structure. Like I don't set aside an hour a day to go through emails. I'm more of the person that like I'll answer emails whenever I have breaks throughout the day and just get it knocked out. But I'm also once again then, I'll answer an email while I'm sitting at a stoplight, or I'll answer an email while I'm on the elevator. Like anytime I have a break, I try to be productive because of how I structure it. So that might not be the best, that might drive some people crazy, but I do think having at least a split system somewhere, whether it's Trello or even in a notes, whether it's a Google Doc or iPhone notes, I think just having it split up so you know what you have to do and then tackling it. And I think that also the number one thing is putting prioritization on it, on whether it's a deadline or just what's basically more important. And like that might be what's going to get you to your goal the fastest, and whether that goal is a certain dollar amount or whatever it might be, putting prioritization on it and then just blocking and tackling. It kind of is my at least outlook on it. But I'm definitely not probably the most organized person in that space, so don't know if my system's the best, but I do think it somewhat worked for me, and I quickly kind of got into that, and so far have yet to see any problems with it. So
Yeah, and gosh, I'm thinking about this a little bit. I think our systems change as our lives change. And you just highlighted that, right? Like,
yeah.
hey, I was at this life stage, this worked. And then as life stages changed, I realized I needed something else. And being open to that, right? And looking for tools and adding things in, I think can be very helpful. I know I've definitely found that. I was probably much more like you in when I started business, which I was like 20, between 23, 26, right? And I was very similar. Like I kind of had a more of a ping around, right? So I was always a list person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm answering emails in between this and that and the nooks and crannies. Now I can't or don't want to. I'm not sure what the shift
Yeah.
is, but life has shifted. Part of it's probably adding some kiddos, things like that. And so I have to have new systems, and that's
Mhm.
okay. Like
Yeah.
finding the systems and being flexible. And so I love that. I don't think there is a right or wrong. It's just nice to hear what other
Yeah.
people are doing and go like, yeah, I'm gonna give that a try. I'm gonna see if I can answer from the elevator and be like, yeah, I totally can, or no, I can't. Like I'm getting
Yeah.
elevator sick here.
Yeah.
Um, so that's great. Well, Dillon, I have a couple of rapid fire questions I want to ask you
Yeah.
that are just fun, kind of bring these together. But before we do that, I just want to thank you, like, for making something that for many can feel intimidating, just feel much more approachable. And I
Mhm.
love how you broke things down and just thinking through whether you're launching a piece of software or an app or something else. I feel like there's so many lessons that you shared. So thank you for being just generous and sharing those. As well as addressing, before we hopped on here, is like the age piece is just something that I don't think a lot of people talk about. And so I appreciate you bringing that up, especially for those out there who maybe are on like the younger years end of getting started with something. I have to say I can relate in that when I started, I was 20, 23, 26 was kind of like the main years I was getting started. And I cut my hair differently. I dressed differently. I carried certain types of bags with my computer, literally trying because I was so fearful of looking young, right? Like literally physically appearing too young to be in the room. And that was a lot for me to have to like figure out and overcome and work through. So I really appreciate you just talking about that.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
100%.
Okay. If folks want to reach out to you, let's cover that before we go into these kind of rapid fire questions. If somebody's thinking, hey, this might be for me, I have an idea, I have it sketched on a napkin, or I have a full prototype ready to go, what's the best approach as far as getting a hold of you and Nebraska Innovation Labs? What steps do they need to take? Where do they go?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing, and it's going to be the easiest thing, but maybe also the hardest thing is, I would say the number one thing I use is LinkedIn, and so
Perfect.
I'm assuming my name will be somewhere on
Yes,
this, and
yes.
so if you want to reach out to me, number one place is LinkedIn. Otherwise, and I'm open to contact there anyways, but LinkedIn. If you go to our website, you can give us a call, you can give us an email. I get all those and can kind of get back to you very quickly. And so our website is neinnovationlabs.com. So, go there, and you can also look at kind of and get a better idea if I didn't cover anything on there that, is related to what we do, and you can reach out. All our information's on there. But I would say the number one thing is LinkedIn. Shoot me a connection request, shoot me a message. Love to set something up. And it can be in any space, whether you have an idea to start something, whether you're a developer, whether you're a partner, you do marketing, legal, whatever it might be, and you want to kind of join our network. Really, anything that was covered today, even if you think it's a bit of a stretch, reach out to me. I love talking, because at the end of the day, really don't think there's any such thing as a bad conversation. I think, there's one way it can work out or another, whether it's something you do or someone you know. So love to chat. So
that's awesome. And I do hope people are hearing your heart of, you don't have to have it all figured out to reach out and have a conversation. I think, Dillon, you're very approachable. We've talked before of like, no, for real, you can reach out and Dillon will steer you in the right direction. Yeah. And we don't do business and entrepreneurialism alone. You have to pull people in. So I think, thanks, Dillon, for being that person for so many out there.
No worries.
Okay, couple questions for you. Okay.
Go.
All right. We talked about this a little bit, but I'm gonna ask it again. What do you think is the biggest misconception about owning a business?
That it's easy.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And rewind, listen to discussion again. Yeah. Is there an important piece of advice that you've been given any time in life and you've actually applied to your business?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Somewhat. This is like a bit of more of a broad advice, and that's with anything you do, whether it's work related or personal related, whatever it might be, that there is always the risk that it fails. But then you factor in there's either you deal with the failure of it, or knowing that you never tried. And I think that's huge to me. And my outlook on it is, again, I know my personality type of just being driven and relentless is I will repeatedly try stuff, and if it repeatedly fails, I'll keep going. And when it does succeed, that's all that matters. And it's literally the repeated rejections and the repeated no's and the repeated failures until one of them hits and is successful. And that's the only one that matters. Then everyone prior to that just led you there, and it didn't really have too much effect, hopefully, if you weren't, all in. So that's kind of my advice. It's very high level that can be applied to almost anything, though.
Yeah, I love that. I've been thinking about this question. I might start asking people, what's a piece of advice you've been given and you wish you applied? I think there's some of those too. To this day, there's things where I'm like, gosh, I wish I had listened to that. I probably should do that now, for sure. On just a fun note, do you have a favorite sort of kick back and relax beverage?
Not really, honestly, no. I'm just kind of go with the flow, whatever. I'm not like huge as such into drinking, I guess you could say. But I like anything that tastes good. That's really broad. It's a terrible answer, but no, nothing specific. So
yeah, no, that's fair. I have to chuckle about this because every time people are like, you mean alcohol? And I'm like, well, I guess it doesn't have to be. I enjoy all kinds of different things. I'm really into these. I think I mentioned it in the last podcast. Bubblers, which are like a seltzer water. Yeah. I really like them. Yeah. I was on the whole bubbly for a while, and now I'm like, oh, that is trash. Yeah. I really like these bubblers. So yeah.
I guess mine might be then like cherry Coke. I just love anything cherry, so cherry Coke's good.
Yeah, nice. See, for me, the cherry flavors have never resonated. I just have not found that I love it, but strawberry flavors I'll go for. And I've yet to see anybody actually nail a watermelon flavor. Like, no, that's not. They put it on candy. Like, no.
Yeah. I heard someone close to me say like all cherry stuff kind of tastes like cough syrup or like medicine. And so I think that can be accurate. It hurt me a little bit when they said that, but I was like, I can somewhat kind of see where you're coming from. And then they were the same. They said they like strawberry. So I think it's not a uncommon outlook. So
maybe it's because they made so many children's medicines cherry flavor and not strawberry. So it's just a generational thing.
That's fair.
Dillon, is there a song that you just can't get out of your head right now, or a book or a podcast that you can't stop talking about?
As bad as it sounds, I've moved now from I listen to music when I'm at the gym is about it. Otherwise, I'm like tired of listening to music. I think all of the songs I listen to are overplayed. And then this is also going to sound bad because I think it's very entrepreneurial to read, but I do not read almost at all.
Yeah.
So podcasts, there's not a specific one, but I like a few different people in the podcast space just listening to that. And there's ones that I'll listen to on repeat that just have really good kind of advice behind them, but not necessarily a specific one. So
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. There are definitely podcasts I listen to for the person's voice.
Yep.
Absolutely. One of our favorite books we talk about around here a lot is Never Split the Difference. And he reads his own. Chris Voss reads his own, and he's got a good voice. That's a good one. And it's a good book. So, is there anything that really is just exciting about the future for you right now?
I think this is, and this hopefully will play in, especially anyone that listened and really resonated with the age thing, of the scariest thing I think when you're in your 20s or when you're young in general is not knowing. But on the other end of that, that should be the most exciting thing, in that you have so much potential. Like the craziest thing to me, and I think about this all the time, is I could drop everything I'm doing right now and with a little bit of money move to like, I don't know, Bali or something like that, and just like live on the beach and do like nothing at all. Or like I could take a year and go travel the world. Like when you're in your 20s, especially, like, and it depends on your circumstance, but most people, you just don't have anything tying you down to a certain location, and you don't have, like, you can do whatever you want, and you don't want to go crazy, but kind of that,
or go crazy. Why not?
Yeah, or that's the thing, is like you can do that and it, likely won't be an issue, but you have so much that you can do and not a lot that's preventing you from doing that. And so to not be scared by that, but rather just go out and try stuff. Like try a startup, maybe you hate it. Try working for a startup, maybe you hate it. Try working for a big company, maybe you hate it. Do a ton of different stuff. Go between industries, work at different companies in different industries. Try stuff, try different hobbies. You might find a company that aligns with a hobby, and that's also great. But literally just trying stuff, move around if you can. Doing all of that and just trying so many different things, I think will lead you to finding something that you really resonate with. So I think while most people think that's the scariest thing, and it is scary, not knowing, like especially when you go through, I think when you go through school for 12 to 16 years or however long you go through school, it's so structured. And then you get out into, post graduation and it's not structured. And that scares people. And that scared me. The first day after I graduated, I was like, wow, I have free time. Like, what do I do? So I know it's supposed to be a quick answer, but kind of that's at least how I look at it.
No, that's great. And yeah, absolutely. And it can be easy to go, this feels uncomfortable, so I'm just going to jump into, this job or whatnot. Not a bad choice necessarily, but it's okay to be a little uncomfortable. Sometimes we find some really cool things when we just allow ourselves to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Which is a hard place to be, though, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I've got like 2 more here for you. What's something people often get wrong about you?
Honestly, somewhat like my background, my age, and the situation in terms of how the Innovation Labs came to be, how I came into it. It really is something that obviously was started previously before I even joined, and it's something that I came into, but based on my background and based on kind of even the work I've put in at the time I've been here, is something that I very much feel like is within my wheelhouse. So I think that's the number one thing of how I came into it and how I'm running it and my goals for it is, I feel like based on my background and based on my even personality, I think it's a fair fitting, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, last one for you. What do you feel like business owners can do that makes the world a better place?
Not have your main goal be money, especially at the start, but in general, like really believing in your solution and really believing in what you're doing and seeing all the trickle down effects. Because yeah, at a base level, you can make a product and go out and sell it, but realizing, yeah, you'll make money off of selling it, but realize like people are buying it likely because they need it or want it, and that will have some positive effect on them. But then also the people you hire, whether it's throughout the course of doing it or once you're established and continue to hire, those people are then making money that makes them hopefully happy, and or that shouldn't be their main happiness, but that you're giving them a purpose. And so there's so many trickle down effects of starting something, I think, is tied into not just being focused on money, but rather being focused on all kind of the positive benefits that everyone gets out of your venture. And you also get a ton as well outside of money, and you should want to get a ton outside of money as well. Your main driver shouldn't be money, because then, there's obviously cons associated with that. So
Yeah, I love that. I mean, there is such a trickle effect, like you talk about. And it's one of the things I love about owning a business is that I get to control the effect that I have, on others. And with that comes a lot of responsibility too, right? Like making sure that I'm in a good place. And there have certainly been stages of life where I have not been.
yeah.
And that has a direct, interplay on our team and clients and vendors the whole way down. So, well, thank you so much, Dillon. This has been really fun. I'm glad we met. I'm glad I scanned your card and it started a conversation. And yeah, this is good. And I really do hope that folks reach out to you just with questions or with ideas and see some really cool projects come to life from even listening to this, whether it is in the tech or software space or maybe it's in something else. So
perfect. Yeah. No, looking forward to chatting, and thank you for having me. It was a great conversation. Happy to be on. So.
Absolutely.